The first letter began with an apology written on the back of a cement sack, because paper was rarer than bread and easier to hide than hope. Ivan wrote it standing, his shoulder pressed to the cold wall, using a splinter of graphite wrapped in thread. He wrote slowly, not because he wanted to be careful, but because speed invited mistakes, and mistakes invited attention. He apologized for the silence first, because silence was what he had given her for too long. He apologized for the way his name must have thinned in her thoughts, worn down by seasons, rumors, and official phrases that replaced truth with procedure. He knew the letter would never leave the camp. That knowledge did not stop his hand. The camp existed to erase edges. Days flattened into one another, and men learned to recognize time not by dates, but by changes in pain. Ivan had arrived when the ground was still soft, when mud swallowed boots and hope sank with them. Now the ground was hard, and so were the men. The guards changed shifts, prisoners disappeared, the camp stayed. Writing was already a problem when the story began. Not a crisis yet, but a crack. Ivan had discovered that words could make hunger sharper and nights longer. They brought memories too close, like holding fire inside the chest. But they also reminded him that he had once been someone who chose sentences instead of following orders. That mattered. He hid the letters beneath a loose plank near his bunk. Each night he loosened it with 2 fingers, lifted it just enough, and slid the papers in or out. The ritual steadied him. He told himself that as long as the letters existed, his wife existed as more than a name in his head. He told himself that not sending them was a form of protection. If the words stayed with him, they could not be intercepted, twisted, or used against her. He wrote about ordinary things. He wrote about the sound of water boiling in their kitchen, about the neighbor's radio that never worked properly, about the way she frowned when concentrating. He avoided the camp. He avoided pain. He avoided lies. That balance cost him more effort than labor ever had. By the second week, other prisoners had noticed. They did not ask questions. Questions were dangerous. Instead, Pavel, who slept 2 bunks away, slid a pencil stub across the floor one night without looking at him. Another man timed his coughing when flashlights passed too close. These were not acts of kindness. They were acts of recognition. Writing was a risk, and risk created kinship. Ivan began revising letters in his head while working. He memorized paragraphs while hauling timber. He tested sentences against the rhythm of his breath. If the letters were discovered, he told himself, they would still exist somewhere that could not be searched. The guard who discovered them was called Mikhail. He did not shout. That was what made it worse. During inspection, Mikhail knelt casually, lifted the plank, and drew out the bundle. Ivan stood still, his body already rehearsing punishment. Mikhail unfolded the top page and read. He did not skim. He did not rush. He read as if the words were instructions rather than confessions. Ivan waited for the command to follow him. It did not come. Mikhail folded the page, replaced the plank, and stood. He said the handwriting was uneven. He said ink smudges were irritating. He said nothing else. Then he left. That night, Ivan did not write. Fear should have come. It did not. Curiosity did. The next night, Mikhail returned earlier than usual. He stood near the fence, posture careless enough to look accidental. Ivan wrote anyway. When he finished, the guard extended his hand. Ivan hesitated, then gave him the page. Mikhail read and asked why Ivan used the word home instead of house. Ivan answered because home moved. Mikhail nodded, corrected a spelling mistake, and returned the paper. This became routine. Mikhail began asking questions. Not about the camp, not about politics, about sentences, about why Ivan softened endings, about why he avoided anger. Ivan argued that anger was loud and easily misused. Mikhail argued that softness was a lie. Their disagreement settled into the space between them. Once, Mikhail brought proper paper, folded small. He said it had been miscounted. He said waste was a sin. Ivan accepted it with a gratitude that felt dangerous. The letters grew longer, cleaner, more precise. Other men began to linger, a cook, a clerk, men pretending not to listen. The first physical conflict came when Mikhail tore a page in half to prove a point. Ivan grabbed his sleeve. The moment froze. Then Mikhail warned him quietly and walked away, leaving half a sentence that could not be repaired. Winter tightened. Hunger sharpened. Ivan slowly understood the truth. The letters were no longer meant to be sent. They were no longer even meant to remember. They had become lessons. Mikhail said the words trained the mouth. Ivan believed him, because belief was lighter than despair. Then pressure doubled. Mikhail said there would be an inspection. He said paper was dangerous now. He said Ivan must choose one letter, the best one. Ivan could not. Each letter was a different survival. Doors slammed, wind rattled wire. Someone stopped coughing and did not start again. Mikhail arrived angry. He crossed out paragraphs. Ivan rewrote them smaller. They argued without raising voices. The second turn came when Mikhail confessed he had never mailed a letter in his life. He said he burned them all. Fire was cleaner than distance. Hope arrived thin. Mikhail said one letter could leave. Ivan refused to choose. Mikhail locked the papers away. Weeks later, a reply arrived addressed to Mikhail. Ivan understood everything. He wrote one final letter. It said goodbye without apology. Mikhail burned it without reading. Years later, Ivan learned his wife had died believing he had forgotten her. He never wrote again. The days after the letters were locked away felt heavier than hunger. Ivan noticed it first in the mornings, when he woke without a sentence forming in his head. Before, words had arrived before consciousness, lining up like tools waiting to be used. Now there was only a dull space where they used to gather. He went to work quieter, slower, as if something essential had been mislaid. The camp did not change. Snow continued to crust over footprints and then erase them. Orders were shouted, repeated, forgotten. Men were replaced with other men who learned quickly not to ask where the first ones had gone. But Ivan felt the absence like a missing limb. The letters had been his proof of continuity. Without them, each day stood alone, unsupported by the one before. Mikhail avoided him for a time. When they crossed paths, the guard's eyes slid away, as if Ivan were a task already completed. This hurt more than open hostility would have. Ivan realized that as long as Mikhail read the letters, he existed as something more than a body to be counted. Now he was just another figure in a line. At night, Ivan still reached for the loose plank before remembering there was nothing beneath it. The habit embarrassed him, even in darkness. He trained himself to stop, to keep his hands still, to sleep without rehearsing words. Sleep came in fragments. Dreams returned, sharper and less forgiving. In them, his wife stood at a table covered in envelopes, opening one after another, each blank. The inspection passed. Guards moved through the barracks with practiced indifference. Mattresses were lifted, boots were searched. Ivan's bunk was examined and passed over without comment. The danger receded,
but the loss did not. Weeks later, Mikhail returned with the letter. He did not announce it. He simply placed it on the edge of Ivan's work table and waited. The envelope was clean, uncreased, addressed in a careful hand.
Ivan saw Mikhail's name first and felt a strange detachment, as if this were happening to someone else.
"Read it," Mikhail said. Ivan did, slowly, twice. The words thanked Mikhail for his patience, for his guidance, for helping her husband refine his writing. They spoke of discipline, of clarity, of purpose. They asked for more. There was no mention of Ivan's name beyond the phrase, her husband, used like a concept rather than a person. Ivan folded the letter carefully and handed it back. Something inside him shifted then, not breaking, but setting into a new shape. He understood the system at last. The letters had never been meant to reach her.
They had been absorbed, filtered, repurposed. Love had been turned into instruction, devotion into a tool. That night, Ivan asked for paper. Mikhail hesitated, then gave it to him. Ivan wrote standing, slowly, without revision. He did not describe memories. He did not soften endings. He wrote goodbye without apology and without hope. When he finished, he folded the page and handed it to Mikhail. The guard did not read it. He burned it immediately, holding the match steady until nothing remained but ash. Ivan slept deeply for the first time since his arrest. Years passed. Release came without ceremony and felt like another test. Ivan stepped into a world that had moved on without waiting. He worked where he could. He spoke little. By chance, in a town far from the camp, he learned that his wife had died believing he had forgotten her. The knowledge did not destroy him. It hardened into something clean and cold, a refusal rather than a wound. He never wrote again. Words had been taken from him once, and he would not offer them twice. Sometimes, when he passed a post office, he paused, not to enter, just to remember the weight of paper in his hands and the dangerous comfort of beginning.